We're going to talk 2.5 and 5G NBASE-T around the subjects of NBASE-T and IEEE added to it 3BZ. Thank you for having me at Mobility Field Day. I sort of feel privileged, although 11 o'clock on Monday night was an interesting time to find out I was coming. So my name is Peter Jones. Hashtags for today, MFD1 and NBASE-T. Smile. A little bit about me. I'm a software principal engineer. Oh, that's very interesting on the screen. I work for the Cisco Catalyst switching products. I focus mostly on Catalyst 2K, 3K, 4K. And this is not a product pitch, but I want to give you some context where I come from. I do system architecture, which means I deal with ASICs and hardware and software, and really the balance of what should go where. I tend to work on products that are anywhere from already been released for a couple of years to 3 to 5 to 7 years out. I'm the NBASE-T Alliance Chairman, and I also work in added to it 3BZ. So I'm active in both producing the products and defining the products, and also moving the industry forward in standards and moving the industry forward with the Alliance. I travel for added to it 3 about 6 times a year. This was actually in Beijing a couple of years ago. I was pretty lucky because I got good weather, and I got to go out and see the Great Wall. And we could think about some analogies about building things that last over time around the Great Wall. I have to think about that. Firstly, thank you for having me back. I first went to Tech Field Day at Cisco Live in Milan in 2015. Blake, you remember the picture? You're in there?
Yeah.
And it was sort of interesting because I got this note saying from this lady called Lauren, it's like, could you come to Tech Field Day? It's like, sure. What's it like? And so I showed up, and I think I had like the last slot and everyone else was running late. And it's like, I can hang around. So I think I was supposed to be 30 minutes. I think I actually talked for about 45. And it was a fun discussion. At that stage, we'd just announced some products. The Alliance was just getting going, the standards process was getting going. So the conversation was all about why is this interesting whatsoever. So I did a lot of this discussion, a lot of this slide deck, actually got done in Berlin a couple of months ago. Anyone was in Berlin? Berlin was a fun trip. And basically, so you can see this online again, the subject is where are we now and where we're going. And I know I've had conversations with a bunch of you guys around the table, so I'm going to update you on what's changed since last time and technology. I expect this to be interactive, so stop and ask me questions, because if I just speak for the whole 45 minutes, it'll get boring. So I've recently been doing some more talking, and I'm actually trying to get better at it. And I saw this great, someone showed me this great TED talk the other day, and it's called Start With Why, and it's a guy called Simon Sinek. I'd recommend you go and have a look at this, because it's all about companies often start with, here's my thing, and here's how it's wonderful, and you should buy it. But he talks about the way to actually move forward is to start with why you do something. Because if you go and buy an Apple, you don't buy it because it has an ARM processor inside and this much flash. You buy it because you like the way they build stuff. So I'm trying a little bit here, starting with why am I here? And I think this gets to why I'm being asked to come back. So, also I saw a great talk from Harper Reed. He was the guest speaker at Cisco Live in Melbourne a couple of months ago. And again, he was an awesome speaker because he started with the things that he cared about. So, why me? So my history is pretty long. I started off, my first job out of college was at a mine site. I worked on a big iron ore mine site. Basically, they had guys driving around with 150-ton trucks. And my job included things like going out and making sure data recording systems worked in iron ore control plants. At this stage, this was before DOS was standard. And there's some interesting problems with having a normal keyboard in a place that's full of iron ore dust. And at this stage, they weren't so much cared about how cute it was, it's just if it worked. I then went and worked for a startup, not a startup, a small company that did networking. Their name was Datacraft. They got bought by Dimension Data. And again, build stuff that actually gets used and gets to work. During that process, I spent a year in America doing pre and post sales support, 6 months in Nashville and 6 months in Boston, and I flew around a lot of America. Just to age me, that was between 89 and 1990. Then I went back and I moved into development. I spent another 5 years developing network products for them. I moved to a startup, about another 5 years. Moved to America, another 5 years. Moved to Cisco. I like to build stuff that gets used. And some people in technology, they like to build a castle in the sky. They don't really care if it sells. For me, I want to build stuff that gets used. I also want to build things that basically add value to customers. And so where I am at the minute for a Catalyst 3K is great because my stuff gets used everywhere. So lots of people already know this. I'm a system architect for the Catalyst 3850 and 3650 family. We launched that in January of 13 and it's going very well. A lot of you probably around the room and listening online have those switches already. And so for me, this is success because what I've built is driving real people's networks and adding value. Make sense? Okay. On the same line, why are we talking about 2.5 and 5G base T? Why don't we just go to 10? So if you think about it, I'll get in detail in a second, we standardized gigabit Ethernet in 1999, 10 gig in 2006. Anyone around the room got 10 gig in their campus right now? 10 gig copper? Ooh, you're special, one in the room. You need to tell me later. So in general, 2.5 and 5 gig base T gives us a way to give you incremental network evolution, so your network can evolve as you meet needs. It also lets you get value out of what you own today. Because if you think about it, the copper cabling you have in your access is actually one of the most valuable assets you have, and replacing it is very nasty. So if we want to offer people a way to incrementally get more value out of the network, this is very important. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution of Ethernet. Right? I distributed earlier, for those people around the place, the Ethernet Alliance roadmap. And I'll use some of this in the slides. I encourage you to go to the Ethernet Alliance site and grab it because it's a great resource. They give it to you in both PDF and PowerPoint, so you can grab those and use it in your own presentations. So let's think about Ethernet evolution. Anyone seen this picture before? So this is Bob Metcalfe's first design for Ethernet. What you notice on here is this thing here was called the Ether. 1973. Things have moved a bit since then. So the project was called 802. Does anyone know what 802 means? How it was chosen?
February 1980. February 1980.
Thank you very much. Now, we didn't mention before, but good comments or questions get giveaways.
Oh, thank
Pass
you.
that one up.
Oh.
No, go ahead. And if you're really interested, I'll do signings later on. And I'll explain what that is in a bit. But this is the chip that basically powers the 3850. So that is the data plane for a 24-port 3850. If you want more details on that, grab me later. All right, does anyone remember ThickNet? Anyone use this? Yes? Was that fun?
No.
Right, does anyone remember CheaperNet? CheaperNet was more fun. I remember when we first got a network in a building, and it was great because I was at my desk. I had my old computer with 20 meg hard drive, right? 10 meg for DOS and 10 meg for Linux at the time. I had some gear, and the great thing about this was you could go and add more things in your network because you just could take out some pieces and put in a segment.
Just don't let your terminator.
It still worked for me. Now the guy on the other side of the building was in trouble. And then we had base T, and base T got much more reliable. Now base T is sort of interesting, but it became now possible to really roll out networking easily. And it mostly just worked, right? The CheaperNet stuff was flaky. So originally we were at CSM-ACD. Does anyone remember what it means?
Collision sensible black security.
How much of that do we do anymore? Not a lot. But we've evolved a long way. So this is a cut down of a session I did with Cisco Live. It's BRK CRS 3900. It's on video from either San Diego or Berlin or Melbourne. I'd watch the one from Melbourne because I'm getting better as I go through. And this is a whole talk about Ethernet evolution in general. So let's think about the base T roadmap in particular. So if you look here, so this is where base T has gone. And by the way, this is a good time to hand out. So Cat5e, right? 6 and 6A, pass them around and take a look. So 1990, we got 10 megabit, cool. What's really interesting here is this was Cat3. 100 megabit, we need Cat5. 1000 base T, I need Cat5e. What you're seeing here is this was like the greenfield world. Every new speed had a new cable, which is cool if you're mostly building new buildings. Anyone's mostly building new buildings anymore? Or are we mostly refurbing buildings? So I would say campus networking, we're now a brownfield industry. Most of our businesses refresh, it's not new buildings. I mean, how often do you get to build a new network versus upgrade an old one?
Right.
Very few. So 2006, 10G base T, we're still thinking everything is going up by 10. Needs category 6A. There's not that much 6A. So what you're seeing now, so we're seeing the change now from going up by 10s to evolving in speeds. So active right now, we have 25G base T and 40G base T. These are running 30 meters on category 8. Category 8 is a big cable. These are focused for the DC. What we're having down here is 2.5 and 5G base T. We're doing 100 meters on Cat5e and Cat6. So we're doing these speeds on this cabling. Because we've transitioned from being a greenfield industry to a brownfield industry. Does that make sense? Does that ring true? So my goal is to go and say, we didn't deploy this much of this because it needed new cabling and no one really needed it. I have cabling numbers later on, but most of the world's cabling is 5E and 6. So I want to give you new speeds on this cable. Make sense? So I already talked through this, 2.5 and 5 NBASE-T, 100 metres on Cat 5e and Cat 6. So the goal is a speed upgrade on the cable that's in the wall today. You guys have probably seen a picture like this, wireless evolution from 2000 when it was like this strange, funny thing. It's sort of maybe nice to have. And a lot of us up here are now mission critical, right? We hear from people who say their wireless is more critical than their wired. And you go, hang on a second. But what they're saying is from customer perception, many people just connect wireless and just expect it to work. Ring true? All right, so think about the speeds. So we start off at 11 megabits. Notice this is in 2000, right? Gigabit Ethernet was just being standardized. So just after we standardized gigabit, wireless was at 11. Now, Andrew and I have had conversations about exactly how fast these guys go. But what I'm showing here is the 5 throughputs, right?
But that one's nicely colored in orange, so stand out.
Would you like it? I could put it in like flashing red with a question mark?
Oh, yeah.
Well, so strictly speaking, what I'm doing here is listing the phi rates. Right? Now, we expect wireless to keep going, right? Whether it's AX or something else, there's going to be wireless that keeps going, right? As I understand it, they're going to have to do some very interesting technology, but we know that wireless connectivity, whether it's actually Wi-Fi, something else like Wi-Fi, will keep going. So, and we were looking at this stage a few years ago and going, we can see where this is going, what do we have to do? Okay, so why do we do 2.5 and 5 NBASE-T? 2003 to 2014, 70 billion metres of Cat 5e and Cat 6. That's 10 metres each. So we sold more than 4 billion 100 million gigabit switch ports in the last 20 years. So BASE-T lets you do an incremental upgrade, right? I mean, if you're in the data center where it's all fiber or maybe it's a direct connect, it tends to be rip and replace. But BASE-T lets you have a switch with multiple different speeds. So I can start to upgrade the switch and then upgrade the end devices as I need it. We know, based on what we did in 10 NBASE-T, that we can run faster. So we said, what can we do to leverage this investment that exists? Is this making sense? Okay, so think back to the story. I like to build stuff that gets used, and I like to build stuff that adds ROI. All right, so let's have a quick look. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to go slightly product for a second, because I'm going to sort of describe what Cisco has a product, and then we can talk briefly about what other companies might build, right? I'm not going to talk about other companies' product in detail because it's not mine. So, product management side, you'll notice they look very pretty. I don't do pretty slides. So, this is talking about product that Cisco is shipping today, compliant to gig and 10 gig, and basically we will be a software upgrade away from being standard when the standard is done. We will offer PoE, PoE Plus, new PoE. If you're not aware, there's actually a new standard being baked called 4-pair PoE, which targets 100 watts at the PSE and 90 watts at the PD. That standard is rolling along.
What was that called?
Its internal name is 4-pair PoE. It's added to 3BT.
4-pair PoE.
4-pair PoE. I'm sorry, when I do that, please stop me. I'm happy to fix that up. Because if you can't understand, the people on the screen can't. Added to 3BT.
Up to 100?
They're going up to 100 watts from the PSC, so 90 watts at the PD.
Wow.
All right, and so we're fundamentally talking about infrastructure protection. Right? You heard Cisco talk investment protection for a long time. We're really talking about protecting what you have in the walls today and the way you roll out stuff. So we believe power and data in whatever amounts you need for an end device on one cable is a very powerful story. And so particularly thinking wireless, because I'm in the wireless world, and I should state ahead of time, I'm not a wireless guy. So I'm not going to go in the ditch about exactly how fast wireless goes. There are other people who could do that. My job is to make sure that we offer the AP whatever it needs to succeed. So we want to basically give you the ability to evolve with wireless, because as we saw before, in the last 15 years, wireless has done amazing things. So given that the fact that we refresh APs much more often than switches, much more often than infrastructure, we will expect to see that APs will eventually hit this barrier. So by the way, Andrew, if you grab this on the PDF, you can highlight the slide in PDF and copy that direct. So, all right, so quickly switching products that Cisco has. We have a line card for the 4500E, the big chassis. Anyone got 4500s around the floor? Yes? No? Okay, so there's a new line card. The line card can run 12 ports of varying speeds. 3850, this is my favorite platform. We offer 2 models. There's basically a 24 port down. So this is 24 by, the ports are 100 meg, 1 gig, 2.5, 5 and 10. And the uplinks are either 8 by 10 or 2 by 40. We also have a mixed device, which is 12 high-speed ports and the other 1 gig ports. And these guys stack with everything else that currently stacks in 3850. We also have a little compact switch. Anyone seen the compact switches? So what this guy is doing is he has 6 normal gig ports. He has 2 multi-gig ports, 100 meg, 1 gig, 2.5, 5 and 10. And he also has 2 10 gig fiber ports. So this is sort of interesting in terms of some workspace extension. I'll have an example later on. Make sense? All right, so we also recently launched the AP3800. I believe you had Jim in here yesterday talking about some of that. I'm not going to go into details on this, but from my point of view, they're claiming a combined data rate up to 5.2 gig, and they're supporting 1, 2.5 and 5 gig on the uplink. So for me, this was very nice because when I went back to Berlin, I could say, we now have the story. We've been telling the story for a while. It's like we have the switch, the AP is coming. Now the fact the AP is real, we can start to make the story more real for people. Make sense? Questions?
I think there's a commonly overlooked topic when you talk about multi-gig, specifically around APs, and that is that if you're investing in equipment and you don't believe that you need multi-gig, 2.5, 5 gig, don't buy the AP, right? You can do 2 5 gig radios with the same combined data rates on the 2800 with 2 1 gig links. If you don't feel like you need the investment, don't spend the money. I mean, it's absolutely a decision, not somebody shoveling gear down your throat that you feel like you may be being oversold.
Okay, so my belief is that my job is to tell you the options and make sure you have the best information you have to protect your customers.
Sure.
There's a reason why I'm in product development and not in sales.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my goal is to let you make good choices. But again, you have to figure out, we looked recently, we said since 2000, wireless has gone from 11 megabits to somewhere over a gig. So if you're doing switching, your real question is, when I go and do a job, am I doing a switch refresh for 7 years, or can I come back in 3 and upgrade it if need be? Now, depending on your structure, that might be okay. Clearly you can come back later on and add a multi-gig SKU for a stack, or slide a line code into 4500.
Yeah, why didn't I have this much visibility when I was buying switches 10 years ago?
I wasn't working for Cisco then. Okay, we good?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So now I'm done with the product case, right? So this is a little, I'm going to harp a little. So one of my jobs as the NBASE-T Alliance Chairman is to try and get use cases well understood. Now, unfortunately, as Alliance Chairman, it's a little bit of volunteer, so you have to work a bit to pull them out of people. The cases that we have people coming and talking to us about, content editing is one. Let's imagine a bunch of people, we have Macs, and maybe a local disk drive, maybe a local file store. If you're pulling backwards and forwards really big video files, going 2.5 or 5 times faster is materially different. I know when I first presented this story to 802.11, I had a guy come up from the room and say, I'm not speaking as .11, but I am from the Motion Picture Something or Other Association. So some of his people, they basically do live editing of 4K streams. And so if he took this technology, he could basically put those people out in a normal workspace. So that's one case, the content editing. We have people on the big industrial companies who have designers who do CAD/CAM, right? They're dealing with enormous data files. So for them, they probably would like 10 gig, but they can't get it via cabling. If I can offer them 2.5 or 5, you materially change their work experience. We also have a company that recently joined called Pliora Technologies. They are a machine vision specialist. So they would have a camera, and instead of having the brains in the camera, they link it via Ethernet to a recording device, which is fundamentally a computer. So if you think about that sort of structure, you might see something like a camera over the top of a conveyor belt, right, scanning stuff as it goes past. Maybe you're seeing basically something doing on a vehicle scanning as it goes past. So you start seeing those cases where being able to split the camera from the device, and maybe it's medical imaging, the bandwidth for that guy really matters. High-end research or workstations. Universities is a very interesting place because universities often have older buildings, not that much money, but a lot of work to do. So I had someone come up to me in Australia and he was talking about, he ran, I think, a molecular biology lab. And so he had a big machine. My guess it was an electron microscope, I'm not really sure. But basically, it did a measurement and it produced about a terabyte worth of data. They then had to transfer it across Ethernet. He doesn't have the money to recable, so right now he's transferring it across 1 gig. If he could take 5 gig right now, he could probably do 3 or 4 or 5 times as many experiments per day without a recable. So that is a significant change on how he gets his work done. Or think about maybe if you're in pharma, right? You're doing drug research. There are people in networks today who need access to lots of bandwidth, and mostly if you're an IT guy and they come up and say, I need 10 gig, you say, I'm really sorry, right? We'll build a new building in 5 years, or I could maybe get together with the WPR guys, and maybe in 18 months we could tear down the building for you. So if you can give people a way to offer an incremental upgrade to their customers, I think that's awesome, right? I never want my customers to have to say no to their customers. Does that make sense?
Hey, Peter, how much of this, though, is actually really out there? Because we look at what people are doing from storage. So many people are moving away from local file servers. And we're moving more into hosted storage platforms, hosted applications, where our WAN links are not up to the same speeds as what we're now serving to our end stations. I mean, I see mGig as being beneficial, to access points to servers that are local, but if it's going down to the workstation and everything they do ultimately end up accessing is across a WAN link, hosted in Box or Dropbox or Google Drive, whatever the case may be, where do I hit that point where this doesn't seem to be any value? Because, I mean, one could argue, without getting into the huge speeds debate, one could argue that a lot of people today only need 10 meg to their workstations because their internet link isn't any bigger than that.
You just glossed over and said APs obviously need more than 1 gig, and yet they have the similar use case as maybe a workstation that you're just describing for 10 meg would?
I mean, I don't know. At what point does it...
It still goes back to where they're...
Peter's raising his hand.
We're talking.
No, I'm just curious as to, because is this
Would
a
you
1%?
like me to answer?
Well, is this a 1% type of the environment, or is this a larger percentage of the environment that we just simply don't see because we have been blindsided by the fact that we're low speed for so long on wireless?
I don't have accurate numbers, and right now this is all qualitative. There is a set of people for whom this problem exists. Mm-hmm. My guess is in most enterprises you have some of them, right? You have the content guys, you have the design guys. Clearly in the research side of the house they have a lot of them. What I think it is these are the people who actually have money and want a better service and you can't give it to them. I agree, the mass market doesn't need this yet. But what I'm saying is there are real use cases today that I believe in many enterprises you have to say no. Or you have to say, I'll recable with 10 gig fiber. So if you think about it, right, let's imagine you've got a big range of users, right? There's a certain set of users up the top who both have the money and importance. And when you have to go to them and say, I cannot help you, that's bad. Yes, Andrew.
I think we should look at it from a different perspective rather than just bandwidth as well. There can be some very low latency requirements for applications today that may not need super high bandwidth. And by increasing the fire rate, you also can reduce the latency. Does that play in at all?
Be careful with that one because it doesn't work like you think. Part of the result of going faster is I do much more DSP work. And so the transmission latency through a PHY is actually bigger on 10 gig than it is on 1 gig.
Interesting.
Okay, and hold the thought. I'll get to it in a second. So the latency trick is a little tricky. Hold this for a second. I have another use case, and I'll sort of address yours in a second. So I talked earlier about the compact switch. Here's sort of an interesting case. We see this in places like conference rooms or retail or cruise ships. Let's imagine what you have. Let's imagine a retailer. What they might have is they might have a store core network, which would be maybe a 3K or 4K. What you might often see is out there at the retail desk, they'll have like a compact switch. Actually, I should have brought one. What they might have had a little while ago is they'll be running gig to the compact switch and then 100 meg down to a couple of APs and things. So now I can give you a story to upgrade that without changing cabling and run 5 gig down to the compact switch and run 1 gig to the APs. So we could have a conversation, but I'm guessing you will believe APs can go above 100 meg. Okay. So my key question is you start going and saying, how can you offer a better service? And so what I want to give you today is a set of tools and explain how that would make sense. When you choose to adopt them, that's your job. Okay. A couple of other things, content editing I mentioned. So we have people who have local storage. So where I work, there's a lot of people who design ASICs. So they tend to have some local storage there because the data center is actually too far away for them. Those guys, by the way, they also all have workstations, and they want as much connectivity as they can. We certainly see it, as I said, with people like industrial companies where if they're doing big CAD/CAM stuff, it's not in Dropbox, it's local. So there's a set of people who have to have that because they really are pushing data backwards and forwards. If you're doing the camera case, this is basically a camera talking directly to a brain, and the brain is across Ethernet. So I'm not saying this is for everyone. What I'm saying is most people have some of this in the campus somewhere. I can give you a way to solve that problem. If you have an SP gateway, right now, with Pynodoxis, you can deliver more than a gig to someone. How do you drop it off? Small cell is sort of interesting. If you separate the antenna from the small cell processing, right, you can need more than a gig across that link. So one of the companies in the Alliance, they have a product line that does that. They have a small cell dedicated PHY that does 5 gig over a long distance and does SyncE. Security cameras, again, if the camera is out there, I have no brains in the camera, I don't need it to do compression. I can backhaul everything uncompressed back to a central on-site storage. Medical devices, when we first talked about the Cisco Live in Milan, we had a user panel was a guy from a university hospital, UC Leuven in Belgium. They do a lot of medical imaging. The medical imaging stuff is basically reading and dropping back to local storage. They want to get the medical imaging off the device, off the medical imaging. They can process it and back to the doctor's tablet as fast as they can. Again, carry Ethernet for LAN handoff if you want to sell someone more than a gig, or desktop or gaming PCs. So I got a ping from a guy I know in Melbourne who runs LAN gaming parties. And when I first understood this technology, I thought gamers wouldn't be interested because it actually is high latency. But it turns out what they actually want is throughput. They want no congestion. So if you're doing LAN gaming, there's a whole bunch of people in a room, they want to make sure no one ever drops a packet. So for them, a cheap upgrade from 1 to 2.5 or 5 or 10 just makes sense. Questions? So Andrew, we'll keep going. If I have time at the end, we'll do whatever more use cases you want. Yes?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay. All right.
I'm also a PHY geek, so I don't know if anybody else is, but if you have time at the end as well, I'd love to hear the latency conversation.
Hold the thought, it'll come out through some here. So I'm going to scan through this very quickly. What's interesting is most people don't know most of the standards groups. So the Ethernet working group, right? And by the way, all the links in the PDF should all work. We do standards for Ethernet networks. The Ethernet Alliance, who produce this, they grew out, I think, of the 10 gig alliance, and they're now fundamentally a marketing group for Ethernet. Their goal is to try and sit between the standards group, who has a restricted charter, and the industry. The IETF, actually that was for a different part of this presentation. OAF. The OAF does a lot of work in developing optics basics. Now this is not part of this presentation, but for instance, if I was to talk about 25 gig over single mode fiber, or 25 gig of multi-mode, OAF starts to show up. These two groups, TIE TR42 and ISO IEC JTC, Joint Technology Forum, ST25 Working Group 3, these are the cabling bodies. So these are the guys who define how you should go build cable to be safe. So when you think about the 100 meters, that's a recommendation from TIA TR42. So what's interesting about this is all these groups have to work together, even though we're often slightly different sets of people and different rules. NBASE-T Alliance, we're a vendor alliance, so we're basically promoting technology. We have a specification, not a standard, and our goal is to basically make this stuff available to everyone, so everyone can consume it and basically get a market up and running. Vendors like me, we build products, but ultimately, customers buy products to build networks to run business. So when I think about my business, in my business, the network supports the business, your business, which is a bit unlike the DC. You buy my products so that someone can run a business and make money. Make sense? Okay. This is how we deploy Ethernet wireless today. So some of these slides were explaining to 802.3 how Wi-Fi works, because they didn't know. Access switches, they're mostly 1000-base-T, PoE, PSC, mostly 5E6, 1000-base-T. We're tending to recommend if you're doing a new install, if it's a new building, please put in 6A, because you don't want to come back. Access points, when I think about access points, they're mostly heat sensitive. It's how much heat you can dissipate, right? Because you don't have a fan, so it's difficult to get rid of more than about 30 watts. But what you're finding over time is at 30 watts we can do more and more. 11AC Wave 2, please be quiet, Andrew, drives backhaul traffic above 1 gig, and we'll talk about that later. And the argument I'll make is there's no easy way to get above 1 gig. Right? You can ether channel, that has pros and cons. You have to cable it up front, you're paying for 2 ports. Depending on how you structure your wireless, load balancing in a tunnel can be interesting. So we in general want to offer data and power over one cable. So today, basic cabling is dominated by 5E and 6. So this is the data from 2014, December, we paid for a survey. So the red is 5E, the blue is 6. So basically we're dominated by 5E and 6, right? 6A is actually growing quite nicely, but it's starting from such a small base.
So I just want to jump in real quick because, like, we're all joking about the stuff, with what Andrew brings up, but I think it represents a really good point, and I'd love to see a little bit of dialogue about that. From not so much from the point of us sitting around the table trying to figure out how to architect this, but from people who are on the other side of the camera who are looking to guys like us to help them make decisions on what to purchase and what to buy. If they see that their access point supports, this amount of capacity, why is it that we're telling them that it doesn't? So I just real quick, I don't want to.
So here is my honest opinion.
I just think it's worth a conversation rather than just continuing to sweep it under the rug.
As far as I'm aware, no one is shipping NBASE-T APs yet, right? Both my company and my prime competitor have announced. Mm-hmm. And so at the minute, I think you actually have no public data to deal with. So the way we're thinking about this at the minute is we're doing preparation and pre-plumbing, telling people about it. So there are some people who will trust their vendor and will just go buy, and that's fine. There's some people who will wait. And so what I would honestly suggest is until you start having public information available, you can go play with it yourself. The conversation is probably premature because we're going to be arguing test gear we don't have.
I'm going to stay quick on this. I don't want to, go on a whole side conversation necessarily to derail his presentation. But I think the 30-second version is we can talk about the radio layer, which we do have information on, whether or not we have an M-Gig port on the AP or not. I think is kind of irrelevant because we have plenty of data on the radio and the PHY layer over wireless, which due to a lot of technical complexity of what channel widths you can actually use into channel planning and whether you have a use case that can actually push that much bandwidth or not, and all the probability of around achieving certain MCS rates and things like this in an environment, why you're not going to likely push more than 1 gig through an AP.
Right.
I would say it's a minimal niche use case that you could probably hit with the newer gear, but it's such a low one. And so my whole thing is, what's the driver for your switch upgrade to M-Gig? Do you have some other driver, like the use cases he outlined there? Are you going through some other natural life cycle for PoE reasons to AT, high power PoE, or UPoE? Do you have some other driver? And like he said, you have a life cycle, and your switch life cycle is usually much longer than your wireless life cycle. So my 2 cents is, wireless is not the driver for upgrade to M-Gig switching, but if you're going to be replacing your switching for some other driver, definitely consider it for the lifespan of that.
And so just let me respond to it. So when I ask people around, right, what upgrade cycle for APs is like in the 3 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. For switching is somewhere in the 5 to 8, right? Maybe longer. Some people till they rust. Cabling is never. So if you look about it, right,
I would agree with that.
Where were you 7 years ago with wireless? So I think we sort of addressed that before. The question is, are you buying now? Right now, if you only get one by chance, think hard. If you can go back, think more. And as a clarification, my belief is that in general, when they built the 3800, they didn't just add M-Gig, they also spent more cost. And so I would encourage an open, critical analysis, but I think you're also going to want to wait till everyone gets product shipping and see.
Yeah.
And so there is the question is, are you bleeding edge or are you waiting until stuff is
absolutely, and I think as well within the next 7 years, we're definitely going to see wireless push over 1 gig easily, and I don't think it's going to take 7 years to get there. I think it's going to be
so either.
I think it's going to be closer in than that. Especially with MU-MIMO, and once we get to more streams on APs, I think we're going to see
Andrew,
it. But
short, I got lots of material.
Yeah.
And we can argue more at the end.
Yep.
Okay. So,
Well, and that's, I wasn't trying to get to start an argument. I think we're all sitting here, we're all quiet, we're all taking all of this in, but I mean, there's still some pretty big looming questions out there. And from a customer's perspective, I had a customer turn around and say, "That's great. We like the product that you've recommended for this installation, but this is the new hotness, and we want the new hotness everywhere."
So
It's being able to understand
let me
why
ask
we're
you to
making
remember
that
one thing.
recommendation.
Were you in the business when we did the 100 meg to gig transition? Mm-hmm. And when gig first came out, it was very cool, but most people didn't need it. Mm-hmm. And eventually gig becomes incremental. So I think the case is start to figure out the people who either do not want to touch their switches for the next 7 years, mm-hmm. or they really have the use case where they need something above and beyond.
Well, it's not even that. This goes back to the conversation we're having yesterday about it all has to do with the marketing and what the customer is being presented. And that's why I'm trying to figure out what that balance is. When I have a CIO that comes up to me and says, "This is what my sales guy tells me that I need to buy, I need you to spec it in." And I have to counter that with, "I don't really think you need that. You're not going to see these levels for 2 to 3 years." That's not what they want to hear. They want to hear, "Here's your quote." And I have to be able to justify that to them and justify it to myself as a design engineer, trying to figure out why I'm going to spec in that product to hit their.
So hold the thought, right? Let's see at the end of this, and I'll hang around for a bit afterwards. Let's see.
I just want to get the conversation going because it's, this is awesome.
Yeah.
But real world applicability when I'm selling to customers.
So we split
none
between
of this matters to
is
them.
this very technically sexy, and do I need it today? Is this going to make money?
Yeah.
And so my belief is that this is the start of a big transition, and this is going to be like the transition from 100 meg to a gig. And what I need to do is I need to find some people to start that transition, because if everyone waits, I never get started. Okay.
You're exactly right.
I got to get moving. Ethernet switch ports by speed. So this is 2016 numbers. Everyone hears about 100 gig and 40 gig, right? This is the expectation in 2020. Most everything is still a gig. This train is it's a very long train. It takes a while to get moving. We told you more than 4 billion 100 meg and gig switch ports. We sold a lot of them. So
The total switch port goes down by 2020?
yeah, that's the law of predictions, which makes sense, right? Because you believe in wireless. I used to sell you 2 ports per person in a campus. Now it's 1 for 10 people. 19 ports difference.
Oh, just pointing it out because I thought that was interesting to catch on the graph.
Yeah.
So again, the graphs are in the PDF. Andy's going to love this one. If this was a Cisco white paper, this is when I was telling the story to 802.3 to get them to realize they had to move. And so this is the logarithmic chart of what's been moving. What you're going to see here, it's interesting. And again, so I know the guys that wrote the white paper. This is basically your maximum that you would get theoretically, but this is what you might see from a high end, a medium, and a low end AP. So this is sort of addressing the point you made earlier. All right? The maximum you can get from the PHY is not what you get from the lowest end AP in the world. But my point to Ethernet was all of these guys are hitting about here. Right? You can argue whether it's this year or next year or the year after, but the trend is clear. Also, we should mention, in general, vendors I talk to, they want the switched AP link to be at 75% of the PHY rate because they never want that to congest. AP's upgraded faster than switches, and switches faster than cabling. And 11AX is coming. I'm not going to go into AX in gory detail, but just picking from their chartering documents, they're targeting 4x the throughput per station. Now, I do believe that they're focused on high density, but high density with high individual throughput is an interesting case for needing more bandwidth on the link. 11, we're seeing, again, Deloro data from 16. Very rapid transition they're predicting from 11N to 11AC. Does this match what you're seeing? Okay. They're also predicting quite a good transition from Wave 1 to Wave 2. Now, I do remember people have picked me out that Wave 1 and Wave 2 are very interesting figures, but this is the common terminology that the vendors and standards are using. So they were predicting that they want to see real ramping of Wave 2 in like 2016. Maybe it's 16, maybe it's 17, but again, they believe it's going to ramp pretty fast. Ethernet, we believe that in 2015, more people connected via Wi-Fi than Ethernet. It surprised me it took so long. And what they're also predicting, again, Deloro, so I talk to these guys fairly frequently, they're predicting that we'll get, this is basically the edge ports, they're predicting we'll get pretty good adoption of 2.5 and 5 gig, so they're guessing by 2020, maybe 25% of volume. Now, given the volume we're talking about, that's pretty huge. So, you notice this didn't become 100% in 2020. No one thinks that's going to happen. So back to the previous story, there's a set of needs and a set of places this makes perfect sense. It gives the ability to add value to the network incrementally and move your customers forward as they need to go. I don't want you to make you go and do a whole rip and replace everything in 6A, because that's no value.
Yeah, and that's just the disconnect I
Agreed.
see between what you're saying here as there's a place and a use case for it, and then the marketing is,
saying,
oh my God, you need it.
have to
You
buy
have
this
to have
today.
Because all the marketing
because your
that comes
access
out.
point supports it.
Yeah.
I'm getting you 802.11 AC. It's a gig per customer. You need this in order to make happen.
And it's a
that's that
systemic
disconnect.
disconnect in the entire tech industry of what, PMs say versus what marketing
Let's
says.
do technology.
Absolutely.
I think Sam wanted to make a point.
Go ahead.
Are you sure?
All right, so
Sam.
this actually will be familiar to you guys, but I have to explain it fairly carefully to a bunch of people. Right, we have a cable and a channel and a link segment, right? And I try and explain what's in 100 meters because people think there's this magic 100 meter number. So normally there's an end device, there's some stranded cable, right, patch cable, patch panel, some solid. So this is a 2 connector channel, right? And in 100 meter standard, you have to have 90 meters of solid, right? If someone comes up to you and says, I want to run, M gig and I have a 100 meter Cat5e patch cable, tell them to go away. Patch cables are bad. If it's a 2 connector channel, right, again. And so when you do look at the cable specs, we're talking about the definition of a channel that runs, or .3 calls link segment, runs basically from this switch through all this stuff. That's our channel that we have to deal with. Now, clearly you can see these connectors, right, they do some damage to your channel. The solid's usually pretty good, the patch cable, tricky. Make sense? So this is the channel I have to work with. All right, so let's talk about some noise, all right, because you guys like noise. Okay, so here's how they formally spec the standards, right? They spec a 6-round 1 bundle. And the one we care about is in the middle. So this guy we call the victim cable, because he gets noise from everyone else. And so when I'm doing the 100 meter spec, I'm looking at this guy. So this is a 90 meter run fully bundled. So all the way along that run, this guy in here, he gets noise from all the guys around the outside. So noise, you get near and crosstalk. So this is my, where are my cables? So inside this end, I get noise between these pairs. I send on this guy, I get noise from this one. That's near and crosstalk. I get far and crosstalk from the far end of the cable. I get bounce backs from everything in the middle as well. That's all cancelable. I can deal with that with DSP. So I get near and crosstalk, far and crosstalk. Alien is nasty. Alien is where I get noise from these guys into this cable. That's much harder to cancel because I don't know what's coming. I also get EMI. If you run this cable and you run it straight across the top fluorescent or you run across an air conditioner motor, I get noise from the outside world. So apparently there's a YouTube video running around somewhere from a very early NBASE-T day where they're running this test. Someone comes in and sits down and they glitch the cable because they've got EMI. So basically one of the reasons why 6A is more expensive than 5E is 6A is much better at rejecting alien noise. So you know that thing where, in wireless, right, how fast it runs depends on what's happening next door to you? I have the same problem. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so when you talk about 100 meters of Cat5e or Cat6 or 6A, it's shorthand for a channel of a certain bandwidth and certain alien noise. I got to go faster. The longest I ever heard of in a session was someone who was running 1000-base-T over 700 feet of Cat5e. He had a good channel. All right, technology overview. I'm going to skip most of this stuff. The picture's cool. Here's what the flow is. Here's a receive signal. I do echo cancellation. I remove near and crosstalk. I remove far and crosstalk. This one's fun. This is inter-symbol interference. As you send them down the wire, the symbols smear together. Quantum mechanics comes in. And end up with a signal like this. So this is what I start seeing. This is what I end up with. So this is what you need. So this is from 10 gig. This is what you need to get this data down this channel. So there's a nice picture down here of where all these noise sources come in. Okay. When we started this process, we're looking at 1000-base-T, right? Basically, the coding is 4 bits per second per hertz per pair. So you end up with a Nyquist of 62.5. So here is my limit line for 5E, right? 100 megahertz at 100 meters. 6 is 250. 6A is 500. Here's 10G-base-T. I basically need a 400 megahertz Nyquist channel, right? But I'm running much better encoding, right? My encoding is denser. So I'm going to slide 2.5 in here. Basically, I'm going to take 10 gig and run it at quarter speed. I'm going to slide 5 in here. So the key question when we talked and started the standards process was, this is technically feasible. There's a way to make this work. There's a great TechWise TV fundamentals. It's about 4 minutes. It's a great way to explain some of this stuff. It's it's positive marketing, but they do a great story of telling a story about why and how you care.
So the NBASE-T group that you and other...
I got a couple of slides on NBASE-T. Can they wait?
Yeah.
Status, NBASE-T Alliance, We're a vendor alliance. That's our membership right now. Membership's getting more broad. It's across a lot of segments of the industry. Components, silicon, systems vendors. Fiora, I mentioned earlier. They're a recent joiner, somewhere down here. The board is Quantia, 5 companies, Cisco, Intel, Marvell, NXP, and Xilinx. We are a vendor group, so we have a specification. We basically do advocacy. We're trying to get our specs standardized. We're trying to also provide material and collateral and explain to people how things work.
Didn't that bleed over into marketing?
Yeah.
This is a joke.
Yes, it does.
Question.
It has to. In 2015, we were really trying to build consensus around coding stuff for a standard. That discussion is done. In 2016, we're trying to basically facilitate and encourage widespread deployment. And part of this is interoperability testing. We're doing Plugfest, we'll be at Interop, and we're also trying to tell us about why you care. So we'll be working on white papers and other stuff.
How long do you think before the mass market takes it on? How long before there's heavy adoption from the majority of the vendors?
That's a little hard to say because right now we're pre-standard, and mostly Ethernet pre-standards don't go very far.
Yeah.
And we have to start seeing the first users come in and start driving speed. Because if I can make this incremental cost, the answer is easy.
Well, if you have a compelling story, also it helps.
Okay, so some white paper and some facts up here, news releases and blogs. Products, switches shipped in 2015. Access points are announced shipping soon. PC and server, there are some Ethernet controller shipping. There are some NICs out of Taiwan. There are major vendor NICs coming soon. Test equipment has been shipping since early 16. Product listings at the website. Some key analyst quotes. Deloro think it's basically the fact you can push more stuff down the cable is a new market. The guys from, I think they're supposed to be IHS. Again, the whole story is more bandwidth, same infrastructure. And from Linear Group, they make the point the NBASE-T spec, we have basically succeeded in our coding is what's going in the standard. The road to the standard, we started in November 14. We'll be done, we're scheduled to be done in September of this year. Less than 2 years start to finish. Lots of links about there. I help drive the CFI, which gets the project going. I run one of the ad hoc groups inside the standard.
I mean, and is it on track to be the standard by September? Like it's.
That's where I'm going this afternoon. I'm going to a meeting this afternoon to close comments.
Cool.
So we had our first working group ballot. We had no disapproves, so we're going to resolve them. As soon as we go that, we go to sponsor ballot, which is a broader group. Yes, Sam?
Speaking of the standard itself, is there any risk to future products not being backward compatible with what's shipping today, like the PoE pre-standard, inline power, all that mess, right? There's been multiple.
Okay, I got the question. So what we are saying today is that our switches will require a software upgrade. So right now there's a lot of work going on. So right now we auto-negotiate with an NBASE-T OUI. So I expect future products will either be .3BZ only or support both NBASE-T and .3BZ. So trust us, we won't mess up your customers that way. Okay? Now, the reason I say that we know this is, in my head, right, we are most of the market, so we have the most to lose if this doesn't go smoothly.
Except inline power didn't go smoothly.
I hope we've learned our lessons, right? And by the way, we didn't do what 11N did, right? You remember that?
Yeah.
So we got through that argument fast. We didn't have a coding war because there was no value. NBASE-T Alliance, this is our picture from Interop in 15 in Vegas. That was our demo. We're going to be back at Interop this year. There'll be a press release coming out that like in a week or so, listing who's coming. If you're going to be at Interop, drop past and see us. From Cisco Live in San Diego, my colleague here is he's the embedded Ethernet product manager for Intel. So this was basically live demos of some stuff. It's not very visible, but this is basically an open box Intel server with a couple of Intel NICs in it. So this stuff is coming. We did a plug fest in September 15. Basically, you get everyone who's got either products about to come out, and you put them together behind closed doors and you make them work. Right? We had a bunch of people in, cross-vendor testing, everything worked, and so we'll be doing more of this stuff. Because our goal is to find the problems before it gets to your customers. Let me wrap up. We'll have a little bit of time for questions. So remember this story, right? 1973, right? We've moved an awful long way. And I think we've also moved just from every new thing is special and unique, right? Because we don't want to be snowflakes. We want to make stuff that just rolls out the door. Sometimes I think about myself as like being a car vendor, right? I'm not building Formula One cars or Ferraris, right? I'm more like Toyota, like Camrys, Corolla, and Lexus. Now, inside them, there's different ROIs, right? But my goal is to make stuff that just rolls out and just works. So, lots of Ethernet evolution. I showed you this picture, right? Who knew we were still selling this much 100 meg? But this is a huge train, and so maybe in response to why the marketing guys are so keen, you have to start telling a story to make people move, right? We saw this quite a long time ago. You have to tell a story so people make good decisions, right? Because it's very easy just to buy what you bought last time. Mm-hmm. Now, for someone who's going to put out a network for 7 to 8 years, that might not be the right choice. And so you have to forgive us a little bit, but if we just said, no one will move. So my goal is to make sure you're armed so you can clearly recommend to your customers, be they paying or not paying on social media, what this stuff means. So we talked about AP radio bandwidths. And again, Andrew, I'll note that we show both the maximum and what you could possibly get, right? Because again, between a low, a medium, and a high-end APs, your mileage varies. We know that we're dominated by 5E and 6. Now, I hope the next time we come back in 10 years, right, I don't still have to face this problem because that would be difficult. But this is the bulk of what exists. And this is, as best we can say, what's actually the outlets in the wall. Right, the way they calculated this was they did the surveys of what cable had been sold. They talked to the installers about replacement rates, average drop sizes. That's what's out there. And we knew we could solve the problem. So we saw the oncoming need. And the first use case was wireless, but I think there's a lot more of them. We saw we could technically do it. We could bring a useful technology to market in a hurry, at a good price, and get it adopted. So for me, I get to build stuff people use. It has value. Serves my customer need. Foundational technology for the world, and it will continue to evolve. I expect that as time goes forward, the edge of the network is going to change, right? It could be Wi-Fi, it could be Li-Fi, it could be all sorts of things. The backhaul is Ethernet. I'm done.
Awesome.
Yes, Sam.
So I still have customers today that are trying to deploy 802.11n access points on 100 meg switch ports. And that's just the reality of doing business sometimes. And so I think that...
Is that a new bid, or is that like they've been doing it for a while and they just keep doing it?
all the above. It comes from all over the place. It's people reusing old infrastructure, or they just haven't got around to doing the upgrade, whatever. And so when I look at your charts that show adoption out to 2020, it strikes me that this is more of a the upper left-hand corner one there. This is not even really a 5-year conversation. This is a 5 to 10-year conversation that we're just now getting started. And if we had gone to my 100 meg switch customers way back when and said, you can do 25 or 50 megs, or 200 or 500 megs, they would have been all that much longer. They would have gotten greater life out of their switches.
So I can tell you, when this first was being developed internally, because it's been going for a while for us, and someone asked me, hey, can we get this standardized? My first answer was no, right? 802.3 is not ready for that religious conversion yet. But I think what really helped was the drive towards 25 gig in the data center. And that was fundamentally based on pragmatic, what you could build in the current technology. So it was about what servers could push over PCIe and what you could push out of a SerDes pin. And all of a sudden we became a lot more pragmatic. It's like, okay, so I know what, 10x is a really easy story. The old story was 10x the speed for 3x the price. That doesn't work with a big install base. And so I think we're getting much more pragmatic on serving the market and looking at value.
And that also hasn't worked for 10 gig. And I think that's the most important aspect of this whole discussion. The reason we're having this conversation is the green line in that upper left graph, because the fact that 10 gig has been on the market for so long, and yet 1 gig is still growing.
I have to warn you, and this is combined copper and optical.
Yeah. It isn't 10x the price at 10x the performance at 3x the price. It's 10x the performance at what, 20x the price? I mean, it's all wrong.
Some number. Well, so there was the nice moment early on where this stuff just worked, right? Because silicon was evolving everything else. We're not in that world today, and I think of it personally as we're moving from a greenfield world to a brownfield world, right? We're moving to fundamentally dealing with what you have today, and more about, I mean, when we were first doing like 100 meg, many people didn't have networks. It was a new thing for them. We're not there anymore.
I was there for the transition to fast Ethernet, I worked at 3Com at that time.
Oh,
and,
I'm so sorry.
and yeah, but they bet on the wrong horse. And it was really challenging to try to figure out how we're going to put 100 meg over Cat 3.
You should have been there for the argument when they were having the arguments about which 100 meg was going to fly between VG Anyland and the
Exactly. I was on the other side of that argument. But yeah, and it just seems to me that this focus on 10x, 10x, 10x is pretty misguided, and that's why I'm interested in this technology, because I feel like this has a potential of actually happening instead of the
infighting.
Yeah, the let's fight about it and still be stuck with single gigabit Ethernet.
Yeah.
So
Whether the APs are delivering gigabit, whether the clients are delivering gigabit, I think we can all say potentially that we're going to need more than gigabit. And how are we going to do that? We're either going to make the ridiculous jump to 10 gig, or we're going to try to have some other jump in between. So that's my feeling.
So look at the picture, right? Hey, 10x. Okay, this one, the people who read this, they thought it was going to go campus in a hurry. Right? So now look what we're doing here. So they went 40, and when 40 gig was almost done and 25 gig started, they slot that in, right? And so it's much more about what can you build that's economical and deployable and consumable. In Harper's talk in Melbourne, he was talking about the difference between functional and usable. And you can also go functional and consumable. There is it works, but can I get value out of it? If we do not build technology that is consumable, it won't get consumed.
Exactly right.